All right, so welcome everyone to another episode of Giant Leap. I'm joined here today by David Amor, is that right?
Yep.
From PlayMint. And I'll let David give us a bit of an introduction because he's a bit of a gaming veteran and I'm excited to hear more about his take on games and Web3. But David, welcome and thanks for taking the time to have a chat.
Hey, thanks. Nice to be here, Sean. Yeah, long time game guy, throwing myself into Web3. So, by way of intro, I guess I joined EA in the early 90s, sort of Amiga PC 16-bit time, if you want to frame it, Genesis, I suppose, that kind of time.
Awesome.
And then, yeah, sort of ten years there, 10 years running PlayStation companies, making games for Sony, mostly. And then 10 years building, selling mobile free-to-play studios. And then, what are we now? Almost coming up to 2 years building blockchain games. Yeah. It's a
Um,
tiny abridged bio there.
Amazing, amazing. Yeah, no, I did have a brief look at your profile, and I know you're been a long time in the games industry. And one of the main things I wanted to ask you, because uh, what we've noticed talking to people from having a past in the games industry, and let's say people that have come from more of a crypto background, there's kind of two takes that we're kind of seeing at the moment where a lot of the people coming from the games industry tend to want to dip their feet a bit, I would say. And I think I'm more comfortable developing what I call, or what a few people call, kind of Web 2.5 games, where it's a Web 2 game, if you want to call it that, but they have some NFT integration in it. And I think that's kind of as far as they go at that stage. Whereas you've been blockchain pilled by the looks of things, and you're all in on-chain gaming. Curious, how did you make that jump? What sort of made you think along those lines?
Ah, all right. Well, I guess there's two parts to that. One is like I've been around in the games industry long enough to know that there are often technology allows new games to become a reality. Or I remember as home computers made way for faster PCs and then consoles and then I don't know, Guitar Hero type games, party games, Facebook Canvas. Each time it's and then mobile free to play obviously was a big one. And each time that's usually additive and there's lots of opportunity to make new kind of games and create new businesses. And so to me, blockchain looked like it could be one of those. I must admit, when we threw ourselves into it, it just go, huh, I think there's enough here to build something that's a little different from what we've seen before, and that feels like an interesting thing to do and a good opportunity. But as to your part, as to why Web 3 and not Web 2.5, and I think your assessment is right there. It's I think mostly because I made a mistake previously. So I remember going and mentioned that I was making PlayStation games, and we had a really big quiz game on PlayStation called Buzz, which was sold millions. And when the iPhone came along, I go, do you know what? I'm going to take my hit game Buzz and I'm going to squeeze it into the iPhone. Like, we've got some great engineers here, and people are going to be just knocked out when they see this amazing PlayStation quality game in an iPhone. And of course they weren't. It was wrong-headed. I was just bringing too much of what I knew before. I was making too many assumptions, right? So that's not the kind of game that nobody wants to play a PlayStation game on their iPhone, or at least, the vast majority don't. You really want to say, hang on, all right, we've got this new device that people are going to play in different ways. It's going to have different monetization, different retention. There's many things different about it. It's not just about a piece of technology, it's about behavior and things like this. So I think that having made that mistake and ultimately corrected ourselves going from PlayStation to mobile, and go, okay, if we're going now from mobile or console, it doesn't really matter,
Mm.
to Web 3, then let's hang on. Let's not just play into our comfort zone. Let's not just make the games we were making before and adjust them a little bit so that they're now blockchain. That's not, even if that works, that's not the most interesting thing we can do. I mean,
Mm.
shoot me now. If all we achieve with blockchain games is taking the games we were doing before and just changing the way digital ownership is handled, I mean, that is not where revolution is going to come from. I'm not saying it's a bad thing,
Mm.
but uh, but there's got to be more to it than that, right? I think we can we agree on that?
Oh, absolutely, and I think it's quite refreshing to speak to, and maybe I just haven't spoken to enough people with a deep background in gaming like you. But in general, where I think you have a quite of a different, fresh take on things. Whereas I think my co-founder made a good analogy before. It was that I mean, the Toyota were making Priuses for w way longer than the Teslas came along, right? So you would think that Toyota would have a natural advantage in creating the first mass market electric car, but it's a different tool set, it's different tooling, it's a different way of thinking, it's different infrastructure, which I guess the constraints of blockchain, have has its own affordances, but also its drawbacks that you have to sort of work around. And we're constantly in a battle within in the team because I'm a long time game player. I play obviously new games and modern games, and sometimes I get frustrated with the ideas I want to put into blockchain games, and the tech is just not there, for example, and we have to sort of think of creative ways to sort of work around that. How has that process been for you as someone who's kind of been given, the latest stuff in Unity or Unreal Engine, and now you have to kind of go back to square one? Has that been a challenge for you?
Yeah, it has, and I think in a way, I mean, and we knew it going into it, so it's not like a surprise. But certainly, trying to build an on-chain game, which is what we're doing, I think both of us are doing, is it creates a lot of technical constraints and in turn some design constraints. Um, and I think that's just part of the job. I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a problem. I made some great games that were 2D and ran on processors that are way worse than what we're trying to achieve now, right? So
Mm,
it's just a constraint. I think in a way a bigger we made, I think we made a mistake last year where we were building an on-chain MMO and hired some great talent, some people that I worked with for a long time and building up the art team, and we created a beautiful MMO that runs on chain. But when I look at, which is, as you know, no small accomplishment, you're very pleased that we did that. But even then, I found that we as a team were falling into old habits. It just was an MMO that happened to run on chain. And I don't think that's enough. You've got to sort of say, right, okay, just because we can do that,
mm,
that's not interesting enough in itself. We have to say, okay, we can technically achieve that, but then what are the new things that we can do now that we couldn't do before, and how do we expose those things in the biggest way possible? How do we show players that this isn't the game that they've seen before that just happens to run on a blockchain? That's not interesting. Who cares about that? So
mm.
I think even then, as a sort of more traditional game development team, even though we pushed ourselves to make an on-chain game, we still fell into a habit of thinking about games in the way that we had in the past. And I think it's quite difficult to describe, but I think that if we think that these games are going to be a new category in the games industry, as I do, then you wouldn't expect them to be like the games that came before them, right? I mean, logically,
Mm.
if they are to be a new category of games and attract new players, then by almost by definition, they shouldn't be the same as games that came before it. So it's really easy. I think that's one of the difficulties is for us as a team, and maybe for others, it's just easy to play into our comfort zone and build a game that's similar to ones that we've made in before, albeit with technically runs on a blockchain. So
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I'm beating the team up a little bit, but I think that is uh, that's something that we've had to do a bit of a course correction on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. How do you balance coming up with a game that is a good fit for blockchain in terms of taking advantage of all the reasons that it should be on the blockchain? And how do you balance that with just, I guess, traditional fun game loop design kind of things? It's like, is that just something that you're able to draw on from your past experiences as a game designer, or do you have to sort of think about the challenge a bit differently in terms of what kind of game you might be able to build?
Yeah, I'm lucky that I'm working with a great design director that I worked with for 22 years, I think, and he's solved intractable design game design problems for me in the past, and so and is good at sort of figuring out what's new and interesting and how to incorporate that into a game design. But I mean, it is it's not an well, I don't know. But I was going to say it's not enough just to play a lot of games and then go, oh, okay, so we're just going to all those great games that I enjoy playing. I think a game design mindset is different from a game player mindset, and
Mm.
I think that understanding there's some disciplines there that I'm not the world's best designer, but when I see great designers, then often it's not designing everything. It's almost like giving the game a chance for the player to have a relationship with the game where it becomes theirs, where you're not just doing everything for the player all the time, and you're just there's PlayStation games that entertain you at 60 frames a second, and you can't look away from the screen, right? That's and great blockbuster games like that.
Mm.
But I think some better games, or for me at least, are ones where like the game engages you, but then you're sort of still, when you walk away from the game, you're still thinking about what you're going to do when you come back next to it. And there's topics of conversation and discord. And you go, hang on a minute, if we were just to do this, then, and now it's not just the game entertaining you, it's you're sort of embedding now the players sort of within the culture of the game and it becomes their game, not a game that we're entertaining people with, if you see what I mean.
Yeah,
It's sort
yeah.
of hard thing to describe, but to try and is a temptation with game design just to entertain the player all the time rather than leaving gaps for players to make their own. I'm not sure I explained that well, but
No,
things
absolutely.
like that I
Yeah,
think are important
I
in game
think
design.
all hardcore gamers have played a few games where they've spent an equal amount of time outside of the game in forums as they have inside the game itself, right? And I think that's the beauty of
Well,
it, and that's
and you know what? That is the game, right? So I think the game doesn't stop at the screen, right? If you're
mm,
doing it right, then Eve Online is a good example where if you search for Eve on, I did this exercise, search for Eve Online gameplay, just to remind myself what it looked like because I haven't played for a while,
mm,
and put that into YouTube, and it isn't any gameplay at all. It's people sitting down and telling stories of some great battle that happened 8 years ago, and and some double crossing and this guy was in a clan and he robbed the bank and that's the gameplay. And so I think that gameplay, some good game design sort of accommodates what the blockchain, how does a blockchain add those kind of elements to what we're doing is as important as what you're doing click to click, if you know what I mean.
oh, absolutely. So I see that PlayMint has the Crypt as the first. Is that the
Hmm.
first game from PlayMint? And you guys are working on
Yeah.
something else as well. Tell me more about the Crypt and what was the concept behind that game and the objectives of it.
I'm a big believer in getting something out quickly. Great way to galvanize the team and learn new stuff. Bear in mind, look, we're a bunch of PlayStation guys that throw ourselves into Web3. And going back to the thing that I was talking about earlier, I think right, it would be easy for us to build that kind of game, given that we've done that kind of stuff before. But that doesn't teach us anything new. So where what best exemplifies the cool new stuff that we need to be getting our head around, and can we build something interesting quickly so that we can prove to ourselves that we can get stuff out and learn some stuff. So at the time we were really interested in an NFT called Loot. Are you familiar with that?
Yeah, absolutely, Loot. And we had a chat with, do you know Loaf from building on Loot
Of course,
Realms? Yeah,
excellent.
absolutely. So he's
Yeah,
another Aussie like us, so he's doing some fantastic stuff. And yeah, Loot's it's a great ecosystem.
yeah, and I still, I think of us still somewhere in the Lootverse. I suppose it's a really good community and a really interesting uh, set of ideas, right? So
Mm.
here, I've built games for such a long time where you build the game and then toward the end you build the assets in the game. That's how it's always been. The idea of starting with a game asset, as you do with Loot, and then build upward to the game is just bananas. I mean, it makes No, when I first heard about it, I go, well, that doesn't make any sense. That's not how you make games. You don't start with the asset and work upwards. But then you go, all right, but then you can start with the asset and then you can go upwards in lots of different directions and have lots of experiences for this one digital asset, game asset. Well, then they can sort of interoperate between the two. Huh. And that's, great example of like, I can make 1,000 versions of FIFA. I'm never going to run into that kind of idea. And that's, interesting and sends us off in a cool direction. And it teaches us, so we made a dungeon raiding game where I suppose I describe the gameplay as you have to collaborate with other people that own these loot bags and work together to figure out which dungeons you can beat. You're probably not going to be able to beat any of them on your own. So you have to look at what you've got in your bag and find other people in your loot bag, find other people that have got loot and what they have in theirs, and then come up with a strategy to figure out which is the best one to raid. And so it's quite a simple game, but it taught us about interoperability that I've just been talking about, and we run it on Ethereum, so we have to build the gameplay in Solidity,
Mm.
and taught us about gas optimization and permissionless design, and how do we fit into the loopverse if anybody can build anything? How does this work? And it's a good example of I sort of call it a proof of concept. I mean, it was much loved. It was more popular than we expected, so it's over quicker than we expected when everybody raided the dungeons pretty quickly. Uh, but yeah, the most important thing for us is it was something that the loot community enjoyed playing, but also it was a good place for us to cut our teeth. And I think that was really put us on a course of uh, I don't want to say true Web3 games the way I don't know, but push us further toward Web3 rather than stopping at Web 2.5.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a good sort of segue into sort of, do you see there being a marketing challenge at all for, let's say, the target audience if they can't tell the difference between a Web 2.5 game or a Web 3 game? Or does that not matter? Does the technology not matter as much as, say, just putting out a game that will get the kind of engagement you want it to get?
Yeah, I mean, um, I'm not sure. I'm trying to think if that's useful to talk about in the context of that first game, but certainly more generally, building on-chain games, let's say, which is, what we're doing is, I think we all talk. People that are building on-chain games talk about how an on-chain game can be different, and I think it can create something that's really interesting and new. But equally, there aren't really examples of that, or at least not good ones. Like if I pulled a gamer from the street and said, "Got to try my on-chain game," it feels like different from anything you've played before. Then the reaction will probably be, "Well, no, it doesn't," and it's crappy. It's not it's not as good as the game that I just downloaded from Steam. And I think in a way, until we have games where you can say, "Oh, okay, well, this is this," and by crappy, I mean, in a sense, Minecraft is crappy, and obviously it's the best-selling video game of all time. So the fact
Mm,
that it looks scrap, let's call it scrappy rather than
scrappy.
crappy, right? It doesn't get it in its way, but it is important that when you start playing, you go, oh well, okay, this is new. This is different from things that I've done before, and this is and I think that people building on-chain games can talk about how it's going to be a revolution and why they're different and immutability and immortality and builders and composability, all those things. But until you actually, talk is cheap, isn't it? Right.
Mm,
So until you actually present a game and say, well, try it for yourself, see if you like it, see if it feels different for you,
yeah.
then it's pretty, it's just talk until then, I think.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one of the challenges that we have as well. We're starting to tell people about what we're trying to build, and I just find a lot of like the people who get it like us get it. We don't have to sell each other on the benefits of why a game should be on chain. But when you talk to a potential player or a customer, I feel like a lot of the value props that we talk about are kind of like none of that matters until you have the fun game first, right? Like as you mentioned, like no one's going to come and continuously extend your game if no one's playing it in the first place, right? It's like there's a reason why
Right.
the
Right.
biggest and best games have the biggest modding communities as well. No one's going to go mod a game that no
Right.
one's playing. So, what do you think are the biggest sort of value props for on-chain gaming? I know asset ownership is one of them in terms of like a Web even 2.5 thing, obviously, and that of
Yeah.
course will have benefits for a true Web3 game. But like, what else do you see that on-chain games are particularly good for?
Yeah. We talk about a couple of things really. The first one is, so we're creating an MMO, and at some point, which of course a game world, a big map that players are exploring. Everybody's exploring the same map and fighting monsters, that kind of stuff. And that game world, ultimately, what we're planning on doing is making that immortal. Like it runs on a blockchain, doesn't run on our servers. I couldn't turn it off if we tried. You know, there is no off switch to a blockchain in the same way as there isn't to the internet, right? So um, and ultimately, once we have the digital physics of that world sorted, you know, where we're happy with that there aren't any major holes in the way that that world is, then we can turn off the ability to upgrade it. And now this game world is not a game world that's owned by us, by PlayMint. Sure, we might have created it in the first place,
Hmm.
but now it's owned by everybody and no one. In the same way as the internet is owned by everyone and no one. It's never going to go away. It's always going to be what it is. Now, maybe there's some flaws with it, and people desert it, and we have to build another world at some point. And realistically, I think it will take a few. You know, even though we're trying to give ourselves godlike status and building these worlds and them being perfect, the reality is probably we're going to get it wrong a few times. But ultimately, the idea is a game world that lives forever. That we as a company don't control. It is what it is, and it always exists, and you can visit it whenever you want, and your stuff is still going to be there when you come back. And I think that's a game world, you know, in the light of Blizzard turning off Chinese servers, and sort of assume that that world lives forever, and it's a place where you know a bunch of people, and all your stuff is, and you put a lot of time and money into it. I think that an immutable, immortal world is certainly an interesting idea.
Hmm.
Like, I don't know if honestly you say to players, "Oh well, this is like a World of Warcraft world, but it's immutable and immortal and lives on a blockchain." I don't think that in itself is enough to get people running to play the game, right?
Hmm.
But I do think that that is a differentiating point that has some effect, right? This point of immutability and immortality. The other one that I think is more interesting to players, or ought to be if we do it right, is this idea of composability, the idea that we can create a game world with these digital physics, and then on top of it we build game experiences which could be capture, fight dragons, upgrade, trade with other players, see if you can be top of the leaderboard, classic MMO stuff.
Yeah.
But the functionality that sits on top of that world in a sort of what we call the builder layer,
Hmm.
we create content then, but other people can create content, whether or not that's them modifying what we've created, or creating completely separate experiences that live in the same world, adhere to the same digital physics of that world, but a completely different thing from the stuff that we created.
Hmm.
And just as our human world has tons of experiences. I can go and play a game of tennis next day, and I can go scuba diving, and I can go skydiving, I can go to school, and tons and tons of different experiences, all obeying the same set of digital physics. And I love it. I can choose to do what I want this afternoon.
Hmm.
All of these different experiences are available, and they all. And so I'm interested, and you don't really get that in games historically. If you have, maybe the closest is Roblox, which is really a set of it's separate experiences that could even be their own games, right? So almost, right? So obviously Roblox very popular game, but that where UGC is a large part of its success.
Hmm.
Um, but I think you can go further with that idea. I think you can take it on steroids by saying, no, all of this can be in one world that we don't own and lives forever, and the players can be fighting dragons 1 minute and then see a friend they know over on the other side of the map and just join a treasure hunt.
Mm,
Completely different set of gameplay, different set of game rules, and I think that is different from for players. The idea that they can enter a world where loads of different experiences are available to them all at once, and they can, there isn't this idea that their friends are on another server. They can just go and find out what their friends are doing there, join them, and persuade them to go and do something else and join their clan or go on a different mission. Or and because we're saying to builders, build whatever you can think of within the constraints of the game world,
mm,
then just like the human world that we live in, I think you're going to see people competing to create interesting game experiences that capture the attention of the people playing. And there's all, because we also let the builders capture the value. If a builder creates something cool, then they can monetize it. The money doesn't go to us; it goes to them. And and so then I think there's an incentive for builders to create something that's cool that people want to spend money on, and they don't need to break out. Doesn't need to break out and become their own game for it to be commercially successful. So there's a sort of utopian view of all these different game experiences built by different players, all within a single game world, and and for it to, week by week, for it to be a different experience for players.
mm.
And I think that that is something that players notice. I think they go to a world and go, "What the hell is that over there? Someone's built a roller coaster. How long has that roller coaster been there? Let's go over this side and have a look at this and play that part of the game." So that is something that I think players would find interesting and new.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm talking to a kindred spirit here in terms of um, what we're most excited about as well. I used to mod, Skyrim and Fallout for fun and part of that
Yes.
community for a while. And everyone just, and there were some amazing artists, right, just doing it in their spare time for the love of the game because they want to change the experience a little bit, right? And
Yes.
one of the big things that we wanted to do with our game and our world is to, reward the creators with, just allow them to, we call permissionlessly, I should say, extend
Yep.
the
Yep.
game, and together we can make the game however we want to play it. And this concept you talk about, where it's like worlds within worlds, where there are different game layers. So someone could be playing a first person game and then someone could be zoomed out and playing like the city management level type game that actually affects the people down on the ground level. Someone can zoom out a bit more
Fantastic.
and play like a homeworld or Eve type game where they're, managing planets and ships, and but the currency flows through the entire game, for example, and the assets flow through the entire game. And if I destroy
Perfect.
it,
Yeah.
if I destroy a planet, then all the people on the planet, need to get off, before that happens. That's kind of the dream of something that we would like to build. And so, I mean, the approach we took, because again, we were kind of feeling out the tooling as well. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with the Mud client that the Lattice
Yep.
team.
Yep.
Yep. So we're using that for our game, and again, we're doing like a lo-fi, I guess, proof of concept first. And we started off as using a board game that we played called Go Cane, which is about cocaine smuggling. What was the inspiration for our game? Because it was like a checkers based game of moving cocaine and using your infrastructure to win the game effectively. So we took inspiration
Yep.
from that, and we took inspiration from Dark Forest, which is one of these, you know, um,
Cool.
I guess OG on-chain games, and that was our initial proof of concept, and now we're sort of moving towards becoming more of a, I guess, traditional RTS as like our first thing that we want to put in front of some public playtesters, and I'd love to get in front of you as well and have you join us on some
Yeah. Sounds
playtests.
great.
I grew up playing Age of Empires and Dawn of War and Red Alert, so having a little bit of that would be really cool, and figuring out, the physics and what should be a transaction and what shouldn't be a transaction has been a lot of fun. Um, but I think what we're working on that I think is a good fit, and I'd love to get your take on it as well, is, are you familiar with these like story generator games like Dwarf Fortress or RimWorld,
Mm-hmm.
for example?
Yep.
When I
Yep.
played them years ago, and especially now sort of thinking back in the lens of blockchain, it's that ledger of what happens in the world, right? It's like this
Hmm.
person felt this thing, this person did that thing. I think that ledger is kind of, it's such a good fit for the blockchain because it's like this record of everything that happens in the world, right? So one of the things that we would love to do, and it's going to take a lot of development, of course, but to move more towards like a story generator type of game where characters can kind of come in and have their own history and have their own future, and interact with the world in that way. So that's something we're working towards at the moment.
Is that a separate game to the first one you described?
No, we're actually wanting to, everything that we do, we want to have it be part of the existing game. We might kill the world and restart it, but it's always going to be the same
Yeah,
thing getting
yeah,
sort
yeah.
of built on top of it. And who knows, it might get too noisy and people might be like, what game is this that we're actually playing? But I think at the same time, like you mentioned, there might be something for everyone in terms of once they do come in and find the game. So,
Yeah, that sounds cool. You describe the opportunity of on-chain games well. I particularly like your example of people playing at different levels within the same world and they're sort of coexisting and, what would you say, affecting one another. That's an interesting idea. I also think that, in truth, we've opened the door to this kind of game, but the ideas that were bouncing around our heads a year ago are different from that we're thinking about now. So
mm,
it feels, in fact, the analogy that we used in the office the other day is like, SpaceX doesn't talk about building rockets. It talks about going to Mars, right? That's the goal, not the rockets. And in a sense, the games that we created, whether it's the Crypt or our next one called Dawn Seekers,
mm,
they're sort of rockets that help us get in the direct. Will our second game, Dawn Seekers, get us to Mars? Probably not. But I can see an evolution of like, okay, so we learned a bunch of things from the Crypt. Now we're going to build Dawn Seekers, and what works, what doesn't, what do players want to do, how do we encourage builders to create stuff that can exist in this world without breaking the game? Like, there's a ton of things there. The chances of us getting it perfect are slim to none. And so I think that probably evolves into at some point in game three, not because we just want to knock games out, but because I think that you, me, everybody in this space is still figuring out what the issues and opportunities are with this kind of game. And,
absolutely.
and I don't know yet. It's just sort of we're just pointing in a direction.
Mm,
And I think I love talking to other people building on-chain games because nobody knows like exactly how this is going to pan out, what's going to be most appealing to players, what the technical issues are,
yeah.
but we all just sort of pointed in a similar direction and starting to figure that stuff out.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I know the team is enjoying is just how quickly we can make changes to the game. I think that sort of comes down to the, in particular, the ECS architecture that we're using because of MUD as well. You know, we can add systems and
Yeah.
components quite quickly and then just sort of see how the game interacts like that. And, the UI is one thing, but again, I think to your point earlier, it's like right now, the Underverse is set in space, but
Yeah.
someone can create some medieval buildings, change our ships to archers, for example, and all of a sudden we've got a
Yep.
medieval RTS, right? And they can sort of
Yes.
play what they want, and we can actually allow the modding community to come in and say, hey, well, would play the game how you like, and if you like that, then yeah, we can share sort of the
And how
spoils.
does that work in, the idea of having different interfaces to the same game world is something that we think about as well, because sure, we have a nice Unity 3D version of this sort of MMO world,
Mm,
but somebody could create an iPhone version with pixel art. I mean, it's the same game, and the brains is not the interface. The brains is and presentation layer. The brains is running on a blockchain, right? So,
mm, mm,
do you say to or is your plan to say to your community, look, here are all the assets so you can rebuild a client in a sort of traditional modding way?
mm.
Or when you talk about encouraging people to present the game in a different way, do you just say, well, look, you can see what it's sending to and from the blockchain, so just build another interface, just go wild, do it however you want. How
Yeah,
do you approach that?
I think initially it'll be the latter, just because we don't have the resources and tooling to
Right.
create that sort of, I guess that like Roblox like modding sort of interface for people to use.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I come from a DeFi background before this, so forking contracts and
Right.
forking UI was just kind of second nature to us, right? In terms of, but we understand not everyone is a developer or a graphics artist. So one of the things that we thought about was like I was interested in voxel graphics for a long time because people can sort of put together these, 3D polygon voxel things like Minecraft, and it would sort of
Yeah,
allow
yeah,
more people to create assets. But yeah, no, I think eventually the goal would be to, well, provided that we have enough people interested in playing the game in the first place, to then start developing uh, tools or interfaces for people to more easily create their own assets, for example, that would fit better in the game. But initially, of course, somebody can just fork out contracts and put a new UI on it altogether, and off they
yeah,
go.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think what we've decided is that there are a number of things that you could be concerned about when building an on-chain game. You could, is it, building a fun game, building a game that monetizes well, building one that runs nicely on a public blockchain, a great token model, um, moddable uh, functionality, moddable art, and like I'm already up to six. I'm sure we could get past 10, right? So,
Yeah.
and the reality is that trying to nail every one is probably a fool's errand. And like we've taken the view, like, okay, what do we really care about here? And let's not try and let's not worry too much. Let's not worry about trying to make $1 million from this. So, like, I think it's okay to think about how monetization will work, but let's not make our decisions about how do we make a ton of money from this in this year or even next year, probably.
Mm.
But instead, choose one or two things that feel important to focus on. For us, that's, I talked about the idea that an on chain game can have its functionality extended by the community of people playing the game. And so, and to me, I think that's something that players will notice, but also not something that you get necessarily for free just by being running on a blockchain. So
Mm.
I think this was a mistake that we made last year where we built an MMO that ran on chain and it's quite fun to play and, we're progressing. But when we came to ask ourselves honestly, well, okay, technically a smart contract of somebody else's could interact with our smart contracts that describe the game, and how does that really work in practice? How does somebody actually add things onto the map that people can play with? How do I, as a sort of semi-programmer, how do I even make a hello world in this world? Click on a building and it says hello world.
Mm.
Like, and I think that for us at least, and I talked about the idea that different people on building on-chain games are tackling different problems, albeit heading in the broadly the same direction. That's the one for us that I think is important
Mm.
that we're spending a lot of time thinking about how in practical terms, how do we get builders creating new functionality that we can't anticipate in this game world? So that's, of all the things, I suppose that's the one that we're keen to crack.
Yeah, that's a fantastic challenge, and I think one that definitely highlights the value prop of on-chain gaming the most for the audience as well. So definitely rooting for you guys to crack that one soon, so we can all benefit from that one. And that's why I'm so impressed by Minecraft, because if you think about it, it's a game, but it's also the toolkit by which other people shape the environment and then share those experiences with other people in the same sort of way. So it's so beautiful. I think someone was telling me that they've got over 1 trillion views on YouTube of Minecraft related content because it's just everybody wants to show off what they've built and talk about it, and that's just all free advertising.
Well, and that's really like the big success of the last 10 years. I don't mean just Minecraft, but, and I don't even mean just user generated content, or maybe I do, just the creator economy. So if it's YouTube, if it's TikTok, if it's Minecraft, if it's um, Roblox or Fortnite, all of these sort of big, the most interesting things happening in media, I would say,
Hmm.
are where you're going, do you know what? get involved with building this. Like we're a team of 16 people here. Like there's a limit to what we can create. Even if we're good at our jobs, there's a finite quantity of things that we can do at once. And I think that Minecraft was maybe the first example, certainly in games, I think, where that's really explored fully, which is like, hey, we can do something way more interesting if we just give you the keys to the car and you like go and build whatever you think is interesting. And
Mm,
what's interesting to me might be different from someone else, and that's good, right? So and I think that that's why this builder component is important to us because I think we're sort of taking it even further than we've seen in Minecraft,
mm.
where that's a fairly curated set of experiences and certainly no room for monetization, or at least not really. And you can't create, or maybe you can create different interfaces, but like the point is, I think you can do a lot more with this idea, with the same idea in blockchain. So I think you're right. That is definitely one of the most powerful and interesting things to happen in games. Um, so I'm interested in how can you take that further? What's the next step for that?
Absolutely. I don't want to keep you for too long. I think we've got time for one more question, but I wanted to get your
Mm.
take on uh, coming from the traditional gaming industry and blockchain. Do you see any particular interesting opportunities around user acquisition with blockchain? Because you know how the whole sort of build from the asset up and build from the community up to develop games versus, let's say, building a game, spending a lot on marketing, cost per acquisition, all that kind of stuff to sort of get people to play your game. Do you see a difference there, and are there sort of unique opportunities?
Oh, lots of answers to that. First of all, what's tricky is that I was at a blockchain games event uh, before Christmas, and like what what one person's idea of what a blockchain game is completely different from another. I mean, what we're doing is so far away from Axie. I'm not being disparaging about Axie. I'm just saying that's just a long way from what we're doing. It's not a mobile game. It's not a Pokemon style game. We're building a on-chain MMO. Very different, and
Mm,
so for a different audience probably, and different audience require different user acquisition strategies. And in the same way as console and PC and mobile and indie and all of those require different UA strategies.
mm,
Um, so I mean, I think one thing I've noticed in my time in the games industry is that game developers always underestimate the marketing component. I always used to be at EA, always like, we'll kick it to marketing once we're past beta or something, and they can do their thing with it. And but we've done the bulk of the work. And the reality is that, particularly now when there's so many games, then um, players don't find games by themselves, and like getting people to a great game is as important as well, the app store is littered with the most amazing games that nobody's ever played,
mm,
and so UA is such an important aspect to that. How that works in blockchain games, well, first of all, I think blockchain games can be 100 different things, and with 100 different audiences. And the other thing is that I just truthfully I don't know yet. I think that if for what we're doing, it's probably influencer marketing. By that I mean YouTubers that have a large following, YouTubers that play a lot of games, that have a large following, that are influential in the choices of games for the people watching their channels, probably.
So would you
But
say you'd be going after more of traditional gaming sort of influencers rather than, let's say, the more crypto or NFT influencers that we see more prevalent in blockchain?
yeah, I mean, I think it's probably in phases where in the in the version of the game that we put out this year, I think that you're still at some level dealing with MetaMask and gas and all of those things that I think are UX issue for most non-crypto gamers. So maybe realistically, certainly this year, we should just expect crypto native people, or at least crypto curious people, that are the ones going to be playing it. I think that we have to iron out, we all do have to iron out some UX issues,
Mm,
around wallets and gas and transaction times and uh, layer twos, all that stuff, before I think it's a smooth UX experience for a wider amount of players.
mm,
But also, I'll go back to what I said earlier, and which is that in a way, I hope that the kind of game that we're building appeals to a different set of people that have passed on games before because there was things about it that don't seem interesting to them or they don't like. And then we can create something that's more like a digital playground where you can do what you want and different experiences are available. And some are traditional games, but something could be, I don't know, nature walks in this. Well, terrible idea, but the point is, I think
Mm.
in a way, I hope that we can reach an audience that isn't currently playing games at all. In which case, how we market to those people, I have no idea. I don't even know who they are, let alone how to market to them. So I sort of have a hope that we can reach at least in part a new set of players, as I've seen happen in the games industry when there's been new categories of games in the past.
Mm.
But feels like we've got to build the game first, and I don't know. I'm not great at marketing, but it feels like we need to better define what the game is before figuring out what our marketing strategy is. But where have you got to on the UA and marketing point?
Yeah, I mean, because I guess we've been more crypto native. I certainly don't have as much traditional gaming experience that you do. We've been spending times in DeFi and NFTs. I definitely think I mean, on the one hand, the amount of people that have NFTs and wallets in the first place is minuscule compared to actual
Mm-hmm.
gamers, right? But on the other hand, we've seen so often how quickly a community can be galvanized around an NFT mint, even for free mints if you get the narrative right, right? And that's such a
Yep. Yep.
fantastic way for user acquisition, especially if you get them on for the
Yes.
right reasons. And I mean, I did traditional Web2 marketing for Web2 startups back in the day, and the amount of grind we had to go through just to get clicks to sign up on our newsletter. Whereas if you do some interesting artwork and get the right Twitter influencers on board, you mint out 10,000 NFTs within minutes,
Right.
right? So that's
Yep.
I think an interesting opportunity definitely to that is very blockchain of course native, but at the same time, traditional non-crypto people just wouldn't participate in that at all, right? It's a lot of hoops to jump through. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think like you said initially, probably more of a Web3 native community in terms of the play testers at least, and the people sort of being the early adopters, and then as we can abstract away more and more of the UX issues of blockchain, then I think we can just go after people that like playing story generated games or RTSs and those kinds of things too. Because the
Yeah.
reality is there's not that many people with a MetaMask at the moment, comparatively speaking, right? So we have to look outside of what's here.
It's just funny. My last company had, I think, 350 million downloads. It was a mobile company, and so that was the sort of, if we didn't have 10 million downloads of a game in the first year, something's gone badly wrong. And yeah, frankly, I'd be thrilled if 1,000 people were playing our game now because
Yeah, exactly.
it's really it's a very different quantity of people. But then on mobile, the challenge was that it's just so saturated. There's so many games that
Mm,
it's very hard to win an audience just because there's always another game for them to play.
mm.
Here, we're building a market, so it's difficult. There's no playbook, whether it's around what the game is or the technology or the UA. But at least it's certainly not saturated, right? So
Yeah, absolutely.
different set of problems.
And I guess in particular for like free to play games, a very small percentage of people actually, buy in-game skins or those kinds of things. I think it was
Yeah,
something
that's right.
like
Yeah,
five
yeah,
or eight
yeah.
percent, right?
Five,
Whereas in
yeah, 5%.
crypto, even though we might have 1,000 players, you might think that 60, 70, maybe even 80% of those people would be trading the skins and buying and selling NFTs because that's just what they do. So it's kind of like
Yes.
less people, but more of them potentially helping to monetize, for example.
Yeah, yeah. It doesn't. The players don't need to be the same shape. You can run businesses with very different, geared in very different ways. So I'm not. I don't feel the need to get 100 million people playing the game, but it's certainly a different shaped audience than what I've done in the
Yeah.
past.
Well, I think we're both bullish on gaming sort of being the next sort of wave of people coming into blockchain. So I think
Yep.
that's exciting because let's be honest, a lot of the stuff happening in DeFi and stuff is just not really value generating, whereas entertainment is. So I think we're all excited for that. But David, really awesome to chat to you. Always great to talk to other on-chain
Likewise.
game builders. I'm sure we'll keep in touch and be following each other's progress very closely. Before I let you go, out of these animals, which one do you resonate with? Because I'm going to give you one of our NFTs to allow you to play our game once we playtest.
Perfect.
Cat, raccoon, bear, fox, owl. Yeah, which one of those?
I was thinking fox before you even listed them. So, if you
All
got
right.
a fox going begging, I'll take a fox.
Yeah, I'll get you a fox. I'll get you a fox. Awesome. Um, Thank you again. And yeah, I can't look forward to talking with you soon.
Perfect. Thanks, Sean.
All right, cheers. I'll talk to you
All
soon,
right.
David. Bye.
All right. Bye bye.